If you take a closer look at the toolbar inside of Illustrator, you'll notice that the tools are kind of put together in these groups. Like these 4 tools are grouped together, then you have these 8 tools grouped together, and those aren't arbitrary groups. The user interface team at Adobe tries to put the tools that are basically related to each other together in the same grouping. Now, until this point, we've discussed the selection tools here, which is the regular selection tool and the direct selection tool, and also its little sibling, the group selection tool. But now let's talk about these other 2 remaining selection tools, the magic wand tool and also the lasso tool. In fact, I'm going to use the same file that I was working on before, which is basically this making selections file, and this is the one where we actually created this overall group that's right here. I'm going to come here to my regular lasso tool here. If you wanted to select just individual objects, for example, I wanted to select maybe this surfboard here and this particular body shape right over here, I would have a difficult time in a group doing that because I'd have to use my regular group selection tool to first basically select this group. I'm using the option key to select this group, hold down the shift key, and I'm also holding down the option and the shift keys together, or on PC that would be alt and shift, and then I'm adding now an additional object to my selection as well. But there are times when you want to select things that are not necessarily in the same area. Remember that there is a method of selecting called marquee selecting. That basically allows you to click and drag, draw a rectangle, and then anything in that area becomes selected. But now if I do that, yes, I get this shape and this shape selected, but I also get shapes that I don't want selected as part of my selection. Basically, what the lasso tool allows you to do is allows you to create a marquee selection, but using a non-rectangular form. So I could simply click and drag around an area of what I want to have selected. And then when I do so, anything within that area becomes selected, and now I have those 2 shapes selected. When you're working with objects, it's important to realize that the lasso tool works very much like the direct selection tool, which means that I do have the ability to use this on parts of an object. For example, if I wanted to select maybe just the arms of a particular shape over here, I could simply go over here like this, select just the part here like this, the arms, and the top half of, let's say, this bodysuit. And when I let go of the mouse, notice that the anchor points here are selected from the top half, but the bottom half of the anchor points here are not selected. So I have the ability to use the lasso tool not only on entire objects, but also as I'm working within individual shapes. This actually becomes very useful when selecting things that have lots of anchor points, like gradient mesh, so on and so forth. You have the ability to really go in and just select parts of the anchor points that you want, but using that marquee method. So that's one thing that's there. There's another tool here called the magic wand tool, which is related to its sibling in Photoshop. Photoshop, if you may be familiar with, has also this tool called the magic wand tool. And the reason why it's important inside of Photoshop to have this tool is, as we discussed, Photoshop does not have the concept of objects. Everything is pixel-based. So if you wanted to, say, for example, select the entire sky of, let's say, a nice little sunset image, and you had a sky, and the whole sky was like this beautiful orange color. So the problem, though, is that there's probably lots of different shades of oranges. Each pixel in that particular photograph has different shades of orange. So if you would use, let's say, a selection tool and click on one pixel and say, select all the orange pixels, it would only select very few pixels because there aren't that many pixels that are all the exact same shade of orange. What the magic wand tool does is it has something called a tolerance setting built into it. That allows you to give Photoshop the ability to choose a range of different shades of orange that are maybe similar or close enough to the orange that you click on. Now in Illustrator, this concept can also be applied as well when we refer to this tolerance setting. For example, let's say I wanted to select all the yellow objects in my file. For example, if I click, let's say, over here with my magic wand tool, I would be able to do that. But right now, my tolerance setting is very high, and that's usually the default setting inside of Illustrator. So before we actually use the magic wand tool, let's go ahead and change its settings. I'm going to go to the magic wand tool itself and double click on it. That brings up the magic wand panel, which by default has a tolerance setting set to 20. You'll also notice there's a checkbox here called fill color. This basically is telling us that the criteria that the magic wand tool is going to use for selections is the fill color. And we'll see why this is significant, because there are lots of other ways that we can use this magic wand tool as well. I'm going to change the tolerance setting down to 2 instead of 20. I'll hit the tab key to just accept that particular value. And now I'll come over here and I'll just click once on the surfboard. Notice that the surfboard becomes selected, as does this bodysuit that's yellow. Both of these are the exact same shade of yellow. By using a very low tolerance, I'm telling Illustrator, I want you to select all yellow objects in my file. What's really cool about the magic wand tool here is that these are living in 2 separate groups. In fact, they're in groups within other groups. They're kind of nested within each other, yet I'm still able to select all the parts even though they live in separate groups. So the magic wand tool kind of ignores groups. It looks at the actual attributes of the shapes, and because it is a tolerance setting, I can now choose to open up that tolerance setting. For example, 15. Now when I click on the yellow surfboard, notice that some of the green elements in my file also become selected. That's because Illustrator now has a higher tolerance, so it's selecting other objects that fall close enough to that range. The higher that I move that particular tolerance level, for example, if I now go to the tolerance and I change it maybe to 70, clicking on that exact same yellow now selects even more objects. For example, now I get some of these objects and some of these objects selected as well. What's great about the Magic Wand tool is that there are other options that you can search on. For example, right now I'm using fill color, but I could also highlight the word stroke color. Let's turn off fill color for a second now. Now if I use the Magic Wand tool, it'll select by stroke color. Even more importantly, I can choose stroke weight with a tolerance of a particular value. For example, right now, if I use a tolerance setting of 1 point, then I now have the ability to click on objects, and all objects that have a stroke weight of anywhere from 0 through 2, remember, right now if I click on, let's say, one particular stroke weight, or anything within 1 point of the stroke weight that I click on, those strokes become selected. If you go to the flyout menu of this Magic Wand panel, you could also choose Show Transparency Options, which allows me to select objects based on opacity and also blend mode. Again, I have the ability to choose a tolerance for those settings as well. But it probably makes most sense to use the fill color here. At least that's the one that I use most often, because it allows you to, again, select a range of objects that are not necessarily the exact same color, but that are similar enough. And again, it's important to remember that you should use that tolerance setting as you need it to identify exactly how large of a range of selections you're willing to work with.